A very special episode on the Saturday. Today with me back on Bitcoin Live is Andrés Zighelboim.
Hello.
Welcome back.
How's it going? Don't get too used to that last name. It's going to change when I get married.
Yeah, it is a difficult name. I remember that we talked about it the first time that you came on. Can
Oh,
you
yes.
repeat it one more time how you pronounce it?
I'd be repeating it, but I guess for now, right? It's Zighelboim, right? Because it's technically a very Jewish hyphenate, but when I get married, it's going to change to Del Vecchio. I'm actually taking on my grandmother's maiden name because it sounds gorgeous, and because choosing your name is a very important thing, I think, as an artist and as a magician.
So why do you pick that name? Is there you said it's gorgeous. Does it also mean something to you
It
special?
does in Italian. I mean, I speak Italian like a dog might speak English, but it means like old or of the old, or like you can punch it a little bit further of like of the old house, but it's not really that. So it just sounds it for me. I'm a very I feel like classical romantic kind of cat. So I really took to it, and on top of it, there's something very sweet to me about two things of like usually in Western culture, I mean not lately, but usually the woman takes on the man's last name, and that's that. And now there's hyphenates, but I found it so much more beautiful of choosing a last name with Adina, my fiance, soon to be my wife. And on top of it, there's an alliteration that goes on for both of our names. It's Andres del Vecchio and Adina del Vecchio. It's just just I love everything about it. It just gets me so like it makes me feel so delicious.
Sublime.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Just so.
so that kind of fits nicely into sort of the topics that we're gonna talk about because I called it like the Sublime, the Arcane. So there's also the old. I think you're like I that's how I sort of introduced you in the announcement, like the artist. I think you had like a love for art. I mean, it's you exude that in all the works that you do. But you also have like this very sort of classical touch to your paintings, right? I mean, they're like real paintings, like oil canvas paintings. They're absolutely gorgeous, stuffed to the nook with brimming with details and all these kind of symbolisms and references. I mean, you can look at them for hours. Would that sort of typify? Would that description fit you?
I mean, you flattered the hell out of me, certainly, but I think it does 100%. This is a very beautiful thing to say. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um, I
and
I I don't. I think the only thing is for me, it's very much about all those things, and on top of it is a very visible brushstrokes at the same time. It's a very strange push pull of small details, trying to pack the painting with as much as possible while keeping it balanced, but also about the gesture, which ends up balancing the whole equation anyway. So yeah, I love that. I love all of that. I love painting in general.
yeah. I mean, that's what I really like is that it's sort of the classical meets the new, right? Because you have like this new medium, of course, Bitcoin blockchain. You mint on, I think, Rarible or Super Rare. Super Rare is, I think, where you mint, and
Super
you got
rare and manifold lately. It seems like
yeah, manifolds, of course, also excellent.
yeah, because I love it.
Yeah, and of course also OpenSea. I mean, many different places, of course, but you have this sort of very sort of classical style and very sort of. I mean, there's this love in painting that you bring out, and that's what we're gonna talk about because you did this really cool Twitter thread. We talked about it, of course, before coming online. And you linked a lot of your work in that thread, and you also link it back to ayahuasca, your experiences in the Valley of the Incas and some other places, as you just mentioned. And yeah, I just want to walk with you through memory lane and sort of look at these artworks and how they got inspired by what you saw there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We'll read it off the top because I was in quite a mood when I made the thread, and the thread is not at all in any way, shape, or form a one-to-one of any sort of drug or ecstatic experience, except the experience of writing the thread, which was not ayahuasca, although it was inspired by the images from the ayahuasca, but it was just me being inspired off of waking up one morning, meditating, deciding to smoke a little sour diesel and have a nice matcha tea with some oat milk, and then sit down and listen to some music and just see where writing would take me. And then suddenly this thread came about. So it's framed as what happened to me and pictures that happened to me as I was going through the ether, but it's it's a bit cheeky too. It is a bit of a joke.
The pictures are of course also gorgeous, and I love sort of the creativity behind it, sort of this inspired moment. But what immediately sort of caught my eye was this first one. I mean, you got the picture over here, which is gorgeous, but
the stone pathway.
Yes, and then I would have never ever guessed that this painting was inspired by a stone pathway.
The one underneath it, Lita and the Swan. So there's a couple there. When we start off, I wanted to start off with a gateway, and again, just being very cheeky, right? It's like you're on the thread with me already. If you're already two posts in, there's nothing you could do. So going through this stone pathway that's at the very, very top of the thread eventually becomes the source imagery for a painting called Strictly Business, which I think makes its way into the thread later on. But from there, we go straight over to the beginnings of a very poor quality image of one of my favorite paintings of mine, which is Leda and the Swan, right? It's a painting of Zeus coming down as a swan. In this case, a swan that looks hauntingly, achingly similar to Donald Duck, and seducing a Greek princess, and which later leads to the birth of a Greek hero. But at the time of taking these pictures, I had already done a week long really, meaning three nights of ayahuasca. And so by then I was already keyed up, let's say, from responding to those experiences and still having probably some of it in my system, to being a little bit more creative, a little bit more, it's a really beautiful ecstatic feeling in post as well as during, right? It's two different states. But that day that I took these photos was the final day of the retreat itself, where we went up to this this village in the mountains, and we had in this village, the shaman of this village prepared a brew of essentially, I think, mescaline. It's called wachuma, right? And there they brew it into a tea, and it's a bit similar to it's a bit like a very grandfatherly feeling from the plant itself, that makes you want to just explore and see and go, and it feels a bit like a keyed up version of mushrooms. So I was just which is beautiful, right? It's a very beautiful experience. I'm very glad that I had it, but they were a little, I want to say, irresponsible because they kind of just turned us loose at the top of this mountain. Ooh, and so on this mountain, there are a series of lakes, and it is quite high up to the point where you can see the cloud line, in the distance. And you can go upwards further from this village on the mountain. And so while everybody else was relaxing, sitting on, with their backs on top of the rocks, it was about, I want to say May or so. So the weather was good in the daytime, backs to the rocks, sitting by these little lakes, and just like enjoying their experience and having a very internal experience. Whereas I said, fuck that. And so I walked up this mountain, and I walked along the lakes, and I was on I was on this drug. And so, you know, as I'm sure some of you know, when you're on mushrooms or hallucinogens, or really anything rather, is reflections seem to have a very hypnotic power. And it was very easy to just kind of look at this completely unsullied blue sky reflected in the water of this lake and just go, okay, wow, there's a landscape here that I would never see. Right? It's like, it's just this first image here is just looking down at this lake, seeing the reflection, and then instead of, you know, looking down at a shoreline, I had a whole landscape revealed to me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
And
because
I just kept it for later.
I can even see your shoes. I think in the painting, right? Your sneakers.
Yeah. You know, at the time of the painting, I mean, this was me painting in 2017, which what I like about looking back on this is, you know, it's like the person who I was now 6 years ago is very different to the person that I am now. So I can look at that version of myself with a little bit more of a kind of honeyed gaze. I can be sweet on that person and look at it and kind of like laugh. Those shoes are also kind of a relic of that time, where I think in social media there was some sort of mimetic going on of from where I stand, where suddenly everyone and their mom and their girlfriend and their crush were just like taking pictures of their shoes and the ground, which was very like, you know, very abstract and very strange and very very weird. And I was just like, I didn't know that I wanted to do anything like that when I started the painting, and it wasn't until I had the whole painting more or less finished that I was like, maybe there seems to be something missing here. And then you got, you know, this, when I finally put the shoes in was when I was like, I want you to look at this. I want you to look at this landscape. I want you to look at all of this and have the same skewed perspective as I had when I took the photo. I think that was what made the most sense to me. It was like, I want you to be able to shift your gaze in looking at this and look at it a couple of different ways. And in a way, I don't know how or in what way. I didn't have an intention as to what I wanted you to see when you look at this work, but like, see this this piece of like kind of cheeky mythology reflected back at you. Right? It's
It's sort of
very
like
thought.
a first-person perspective.
Yeah, exactly. You are first person shooter, but with tons of drugs and lots of art history references was essentially it. But then we go down, and the pictures were wonderful because I could kind of take you, because I'd taken a bunch of pictures of myself walking down this pathway. I could curate them as I pleased and see what fit logically. And this was the path that I took around that lake, heading up the mountains. And in that part of of what, you know, the Peruvian mountains, there was just this beautiful foliage. It was like, imagine, I don't know, like the highlands of Europe, but drag them to imagine they were coming off of the rainforest, right? It's like that's what Peru is. It's like an alternate dimension.
Yeah, it is.
And you have a bunch of these like different structures too. If we go down, we can go through the whole thing if you want, or you can choose highlights. But
Yeah,
if
don't
you
worry. Yeah, I'm trying to follow your directions, but yeah, I love the whole thing actually. But this is
right,
like another example of it. Like, you know, you got the painting here, and over here you got what inspired you to paint it, or at least, you know, the background. And the
so
nice thing is sort of, you know, how it fits together, and where you got the inspiration from. It's just, yeah, I find it highly unique. It's I guess it was the whole experience that sort of infuses you with these ideas, and then and that sort of go with you through the years, and then you take it for a painting, I guess. How does
exactly.
that go about?
Well, I mean, again, I like to hoard images. So for me, this was, you know, this thread was made in 2022, but these pictures come from 2017. And
Yeah.
so I look at it. I can look at both the images from from the Peru experience, and as well as the paintings that were created in the interim of those. I guess at the time was 5 years. Um, and look at them and just be able to play with them and look at them a bit more, not dispassionately, but with a kind of like a trickster's eye, right? It's like I can let you in to my world and my experience, which already you can't 100% get behind, but still give you an experience that is enjoyable and gives you a small taste of what I felt, right? I can potentially key you up like how the
Yeah.
experience itself keyed me up, and make you laugh at the same time.
Yeah, it's very playful and very inspired, and you definitely take your viewer along, and it gives you a sort of a look behind the art, like where how you tick, where you get your inspiration, and of course it also gives you these beautiful views of the place you visited, because this is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
I
that
haven't
look
been
like
there yet.
they look like a Windows desktop. Yeah, they are a MacBook desktop. They
Yeah.
are they're really wonderful. It's funny. I wasn't expecting to necessarily go back through these today, but it's nice to be able to look through them with someone and get new ideas as well. Like, I know we're eventually going to talk about AI, but my process really involves, for me, it's a really responsive creative process. Like, I really believe that everything that is good and that is original is just a response to a longer lineage and train of experiences and sensory inputs and just the memory and responding to other artworks, responding to anything and everything, and taking that response and then turning it into art. So
Yeah.
for me, looking at these, I'm looking at a couple that just make me chuckle. Like, there's one image here of there were tons of llamas on the path, you see, like, from the
This one.
village to near the top of the mountain. And so there's a there's at least just the one image of just like of llama poop with this insanely saturated orange fungus growing out of it. It's
Yes.
just like, and that at the time I thought was so funny and so beautiful. And then when I went to go show the rest of the people coming down off of the experience what I'd taken photos of, I wanted to show them that first, and they looked at me like an alien. And then I showed them the images of the reflected sky and the water, and they were like, "Oh, that's so beautiful." And I was like, "No, they're just both just as beautiful." I also knew that there would be a bit of revulsion, right? It's like, it's it's one of those things. It's like, where does the lotus come from? It comes from the mud, and I
Yeah.
had it right there. But it's something that I was also on drugs. It was like, it was much. I didn't have I didn't have that block that we would normally have when we're sober. There's tons shit that there's so many images here. I think we're better off, like, I could go through it again one by one, but
Well,
we could talk about the ones with the
just to
paintings.
go back to this one, is like I mean this image. I mean I know that the occult also sort of plays or figures into your work, but this is like the motto, like above, so as above, so below, right? This is, I
Yep.
mean, like a
Some as
perfect.
above, so below porn for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What are you supposed to do with that? You know what I mean? Like, there's some images here that you you look at them and you know that they function very beautifully on their own. And I wanted to do something with that image for a very, very long time, and yet I was just like, I don't think I can do anything further as far as a painting goes with this image, other than potentially just painting it by itself. So, and then we have this one here, which is the Queen Mab's
Yeah.
hut, right? Anyone that's not, I'm a very big mythology buff. I'm
Mhm.
not too well versed in everything, but I do have little flavors. And Queen Mab is a fairy queen from, like, I would imagine, really, I know it from like, ancient English fairy tales, but like, and myth and Shakespeare. But someone would be able to correct me on that. And I stuck my head inside that. That is a structure, or at the very least, a little cavern. Like, I don't know if it's there now, right? It's 5 years on, 6 years on, but I did, on drugs, just go, and I was like, maybe I'll just stick my head and see if someone comes out and says hello to me. And I didn't go
Nobody
too
did.
far.
But it's really, yeah. And this one also, I mean, look at this.
The gateway.
This is also absolutely gorgeous, of course, if you see this in real life. But
it's the
then
gateway to the hacienda. Yeah.
What you did with it, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of you transform the everyday. Well, I wouldn't say everyday because the picture is not everyday, but you take it to another level, right? And you so can you tell us a little bit about what inspired this particular painting from this particular image? What's the link here?
So I'll give you the base link of the image itself, and then we can ride into the story of the painting. So this is the courtyard, for lack of a better word, of the hacienda, the ranch, the big ranch house that we were actually doing our ayahuasca in, right, which had its own chamber that was specifically for the ayahuasca rituals, always at night. But we did 3 rituals, and we had a week long of retreat, so we would have every other day, just be able to like walk around and hang out. And this image was just so beautiful to me. It has this Lord of the Rings type beat, right? It's like this very holy tree. It's just off center, but at the same time still like kind of has its own symmetry. You're being led in through this courtyard to this why is this tree so important, right? It's the only tree that's there. And in the background you have the mountains that encircle the hacienda, which is right on this river that goes all the way from Machu Picchu and past Cusco to get to the hacienda and further along, right? It's from the rainforest down. And it was just a very cool place where you're done throwing your guts up and seeing the face of God in the evening, and then in the daytime after not sleeping you get up and you see the dawn creeping over this beautiful bonsai looking tree. And I loved it. I also love the I don't want to use an art school word, but I really love it. The liminality of it, right? I like what are called liminal spaces, which are anything that is in between a gateway, a doorway, right? An elevator, stairs, trains. Those really sing to me because there are places where people don't normally just hang out and sit, and to see them, these places that are not still, made very still, I think makes for really beautiful and dynamic images. And for me, that was also an opportunity, for lack of a better word, a liminal space like this is an opportunity as an artist for a bit of an exorcism, where the painting itself is like, I think it's safe to say I was still working through some shit, working through some family issues from
because of the two faces that got lost.
Yeah, it's so it's like look at it now. Like when you look at this image, I wanted it to feel so, all the centeredness. I wanted the ground to drop away immediately from the original image. I wanted you to have no foreground, no sense of balance. I wanted it to feel like you were either getting dropped into or dropped past this place, which may or may not exist. Right? It's a painting, obviously, but right, but it may or may not exist. And so I wanted to do that in as much of a riotous color as possible. When I was doing ayahuasca the first night or two, that was how it felt like to be in the visionary state. It was much more akin to a blend of wakeful consciousness, right, and dreaming. And dream logic to wakeful consciousness is incredibly jarring. So if you've ever tried like it is a bit like memory in that way, but you're awake, you're fully aware, and you're just like, how do I get my bearings in this psychic space? But for me it was like, what can I do here to do that? And so the first thing I did was essentially drip the oil paints from the bottom up. I actually started with a canvas flipped upside down, and I let that just go down like a waterfall, and create these different shapes which, you know, like the background is something that I just wanted the background kind of set. I wanted it to feel very like a city of shades, and I wanted it to
Mhm.
feel like a city. I wanted there to be structures, but I didn't want to go fully into detail in any way. And the easiest way to do that was just to do the bare minimum of little tiny like carvings and sculptings in terms of using the brush, right? You have this like strange lighthouse type building that is over on the left, just behind the family. You have all these like little towers and little windows and little fires, and from there I went and from the background back into the foreground and started doing what I wanted to do with other images that I had collected. In this case, it was an image of a very spooky looking very spooky looking 1950s white family.
Yeah.
And for me, when I did this, I was still coming into my own as an artist and as a young man, and as a young man, even now, like looking into, you know, having a family. But my family life was a very a very strange thing of like putting up appearances a lot of the time, right? Where I come from, where I was born in Venezuela, and the community that I come from, um, it's very, and even still now, which is Venezuelan Jews, right? Venezuelan
Mhm.
Jewry. It's a very tight knit, small community within a community. Um, and Venezuela, in that community, when I was born, then and now, was like 20 years behind the rest of, for lack of a better term, the West. It
Mhm.
was, you know, I have parents that were born in the 1970s, but some of their values, you know, come from the 1950s, where, you know, you marry it's just a little bit sexier. It's like you marry very young, and you have children very young, and you keep up appearances. The woman has a particular, you know, a particular role. Um, you know, essentially, Apoya, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, she I broke out into Spanish. She lifts up her husband and helps out in the background, and husband brings home the bacon. And when we left Venezuela, and both my immediate family and like grandparents and all that had very specific roles. And coming to America, it kind of it shattered a bit in terms of its its lack of reality was made very manifest.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make a piece based around that. It's like, you know, who are these people? Like I know, you know, this illusion of who I thought my parents were versus, and my siblings and us as a unit, as a family. It's like, what is the fake image look like, and how can I get towards the real relationships
Yeah.
between them all?
And that's also referenced in the gateway and the liminal space, that you move beyond it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the tree, of course. You kept the tree.
Had to. Did you see that tree? It
Yeah,
was
yeah, no, absolutely,
beautiful.
absolutely. Yeah, like you said, it's kind of like from Lord of the Rings, minus Tirith, the
Exactly. The
yes,
silver tree,
yep, yep. And
which
this,
is a link to another tree, hilariously enough.
true, true. Did you also read Mircea Eliade? Because you brought
Um,
up liminal spaces.
I have not. You should send me all of these things. I do love to read, and I give me everything you can. I've never read that
Okay,
author.
well, you'll love it. So, and then you got this one. I mean, sorry for going through all of them, right? But so again, right? This picture is absolutely gorgeous, um, and I have never seen anything like it. And then you transform it into this, which is also very gorgeous. And there's like a woman hanging upside down in the tree. So
Yes. Let's. You want to write in?
what's going on?
Oh man, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. The coffee is flowing right through me. I don't get a chance to talk about these in depth. Um, so this tree is, if I'm not mistaken, it's a datura tree. They're known colloquially. It's a, you know, datura. I believe it's datura. Someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's an incredibly powerful and not recommended. I've never tried it. I've been told never to try it ever. Hallucinogen and poison.
Ah,
Um, Yes, but it blossoms very beautifully. I've actually this particular painting I very recently made into an edition, and back when we were all doing open editions, and the collectors that collected it, there is a very big spiritual link to these trees and these plants. I actually had a collector reach out and he was like, I used to call them moonflowers, like moon trees, and they seemed this particular collector, if he listens to this, he'll know who he is. He was just like, yeah, every time I go somewhere, they seem to just blossom around me. He was like, I needed to get this edition because I'd never seen it depicted in art before. And I was like, wow, I can't believe that a particular plant, but of course it's this kind of particular plant,
Yeah.
had such a strong link to this collector and a couple of others that were like, what the fuck? And a couple of artists as well that were just like, oh my God, that's an angel trumpet. It's like, oh my God. Because the reason it's called angel trumpets is because the visions that apparently are incurred from this tend to be more explosive, to the point where it's a reference to the I believe the trumpet of the archangel Gabriel blowing in an apocalyptic, the
Yeah.
apocalyptic dream of the Christian Bible, which to me is so fucking metal. But you won't catch me chewing these leaves. The reason why I like having it side by side with the painting because the image of it, even I couldn't capture it in its fullness. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
just me intending to try, and of course, it comes out very different. But all of these trees in this valley were so beautiful, and at the same time as doing all of these drugs or plant medicines or what have you, I was dipping my toes very deeply, continuously into the mysticism side, particularly um, meditation in combination with Kabbalah and different mythologies. And trees come up a lot in any mythology,
True.
but within the within what would be called Western Kabbalah, right? Hermetic Kabbalah, you would have the tree of the Kabbalistic tree of life, or within Norse mythology, you would have
Yes, no.
Yggdrasil, right? I'm probably butchering it, but in the tarot, which is an extension of both of these things, um, you do have an extension of this symbol in the card called the Hanged Man, which is a
True.
reference to, in this particular case, in it can be it's a reference to Odin, who hangs himself off of the world tree Yggdrasil to gain knowledge of himself and gain knowledge of the universe. He dies on the tree and hangs himself there for 9 days, right?
And then
uh
rebirth.
exactly. Christ on the cross is another iteration of this myth, right? It's like you have all of these, any hung god or sliced or sacrificial god is an extension of this card. Dionysus is that way,
Yeah.
um Hercules to some extent, but like the this kind of like this becoming of oneself. And so I knew I wanted to do an image based off of that. And at the time, I was also exploring a lot more just feminine figures, because a lot of it really was just me exploring my own feminine. So I was like, okay, I want to do something like that. And it came out very beautifully. But similarly to the last painting we discussed, I wanted it to feel 100% more like, this is just like, imagine you're falling down Alice in Wonderland. You're going down the rabbit hole, and you're
Mhm.
falling through that rabbit hole consciousness. You would catch these small scenes as you fell. So that's how I wanted these particular paintings to feel. So this one again does not have a definitive foreground. It very specifically has a downward motion, right? Like a downward
Yeah.
inflection, where you're not here to stay. You're just passing through. Like you are going through the strata of whatever you want to, the unconscious, the mass unconscious, or whatever. Like I wanted that feeling when you look at this image.
Now you did it. And the angel trumpet name is very, I mean, also the shape of the flowers is, I mean, it's a very, I had no idea what it was called, but thank you for telling me. It's a beautiful painting again, and a beautiful story behind it. And then we got this one, like, again, like very picturesque. I mean, It's like a ruin. It's overflowing with green. It's really gorgeous, like, you know, in some kind of English land house, you know, that hasn't been upkept or something. And then you have this also very gorgeous painting. And I guess it's in the same vein as the previous ones, like a liminal space, a pathway or a gateway to a beyond.
To X, to question mark land.
Yes. So you want to say anything about this particular painting, or you want to move on?
Sure. I am particularly proud of the the detail on the lingerie gets overlooked on this one. I do really, I adore this painting. I actually have I just took pictures of a much higher resolution version of it, so I'll be updating it a little bit. But this painting, unlike the previous two, is a bit more grounded. You know, you have a very specific, almost religious looking space. There's symmetry on both sides to one extent or another with the foreground. You have these beautiful flowers. You have this ambiguous space in the background, and you have this very sensual figure coming in right at the threshold, which is comes to the name of the painting, which is itself stolen from another painting. When I was studying in Pittsburgh for my undergraduate degree, there was the Carnegie Museum, and so the Carnegie Museum was walking distance from my university, which was Carnegie Mellon University, which takes its name from this this uber rich Scotsman who came over and essentially just dominated the metal industry. But this huge collection came about, and there was a very, very beautiful sort of Orientalist inspired, very mystical painting called The Keeper of the Threshold, which was this androgynous young man sitting on a stairway leading to, again, question mark space, and sitting there holding a lotus and a knife and looking at you like, well, come on then, like, come forward if you want to, like, come on in. And I wanted to do a riff on that using this image. It's very funny what happened with this image, because if you look at the original, obviously it's very squashed down, but because of the there's a chance factor of, I just happened to have this gigantic board that was very square, and so the image changed as soon as I started painting it. Yeah, I just I wanted to do something along the lines of a very initiatic looking temple space, very strange, haunting apparition that is at once kind of like completely separate from the landscape and also part of the landscape. And I wanted it to have that very, very, very erotic energy. Like I wanted it to feel a little bit of like, again, in this initiatic state, in the state of of you know, of this trip and of ayahuasca in general. It's like all of these images, like the sensual, the more dangerous, the more psychological, and the more death oriented, everything just kind of starts coalescing and turning into one thing where you can see all of it displayed next to one another. Their little links are established. So for this one, that was what I wanted to do. It was like there's this idea of sex, death, rebirth with the flowers, and then mystery in the background as you just continue to go forward, because you don't really have a choice.
I really love the flowers also. The detail that you put in there is incredible.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about that trip that you had, like what you experienced during your ayahuasca session?
It's very, you know, talking about it's like it's like going on to Arrowwood and talking about a trip experience is like, it's better to, I think, write about it than talk about it most of the time. But when I went, I was there for a week. I had taken time off from my job at the time, which was in the basement of Christie's handling art. I'd taken off time only to be fired within like a week or two for mishandling a piece. I accidentally shipped something that was meant to go I think to London, to I think maybe Hong Kong or something. And yeah, they booted me just as I'd like taken off time to go and go to Peru. But at that point, you know, everything was already paid for. You know, things were precarious, but I was safe, and I was like, well, clearly I'm not meant to be doing this. You know, like working within the art world as some sort of great
maybe
shadow.
you sent it where it needed to go, right?
Well, that's exactly it, right? Is that I was prepped. It's very strange when I think when it comes to significant mystical and magical experiences, um, the external tends to shift for you to be able to fully appreciate that internal experience. But I was originally going to go with my father because he was the one that was he was having more of a breakdown than I was at the time. And he was like, I need to do this, I need to fix myself, I need to do all these things. And by the time of the trip, which he had, you know, he was just, he got very scared. He got very scared of losing control, which I understand because it's something that comes up, it does come up in this kind of experience. And he said, you know what, just you go. I'm gonna stay back here, and you'll just tell me how it was afterwards. And I said, on the external, I said, oh really? But on the inside, I said, oh thank God. Oh my goodness. Like I can't imagine having to go through that, you know, like that coloring my experience of like I am just like I'm tripping the light fantastic and my father is right in front of me and we've never had an experience like this before and it would have changed what I'd seen. Um, I'll try to keep as brief as possible. First night was about fear of death and fear of madness, which literally was that the trip extended out into a full-blown hyperlapse of what would happen if I had lost my mind on said trip, was taken back to the United States and went through this Looney Tunes hyperlapse of you know, going crazy, not being able to hold down a job. Remember where I was coming from with this trip. Walking around the streets of say New York or something, and just like being this you know, this is just crazed derelict, getting sent to a mental hospital. Suddenly the mental hospital looks just like the room where I'm tripping in, and it turns out I never was tripping. I just lost my mind, and these people are just in it here with me with the nut house, and then eventually being cast out of there and then being left to die in the street in some gutter somewhere. And then suddenly hyperlapsing that, going from being you know, dying in the gutter, becoming a corpse, rotting, right, turning into a skeleton. But then life seems to just, it kept going on. It was like, okay, you're a skeleton now you're dust, now you're still aware, though you're still aware of all of existence. Okay, here's the planet. All right, you are still aware of the planet. Now the planet is changing. Okay, it's changed. Now the sun is and now the sun is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. The sun is now as red as Mars. The planet is as red as Mars. You're in a desert. And then suddenly the sun explodes and there's nothing. But wait, you're still here. You're still conscious. You're still experiencing anyway. And it was at that point that, of course, I reached out and I was, can I get a glass of water? And the attendants, that there were 4 attendants there, got my water. They took me outside and I looked at my reality through that very visceral, very visual, very palpable ego death, and felt very connected with everything, having had that moment of realization of the, you know, at least within the trip, it's like not only does consciousness go on, but can it go on, and this is what it might be like, but also that this consciousness that I feel is actually intimately connected with all these other consciousnesses, right? So that was night 1. And then night 2 was complicated. Night 2 was very complicated. And I won't go too far into it because it won't make too much sense. I imagine if I told you like I made the wrong offering at the wrong altar and it affected my experience. That would be about as good a summary as it could be. And then finally the third night, you know, after I'd had these 2 very intense experiences, I was told by I was given very practical advice by a much older friend, because these 2 nights of very intense experience of seeing God knows, of seeing, you know, this very trippy experience of the first night, the second experience having experiencing like higher consciousnesses and gods and goddesses and spiritual forces, and then finally getting to the third night, this friend of mine said, you know, you don't have to drink the whole cup of juice. And I was like, what? And he's like, yes, you idiot. Like, set and setting. Like, you have the setting, but your set is like, you just keep going for this like huge ride. Is you can have a little bit of it and sample it and see how it feels and tune it in that way. Like, you can tune your receiver to the experience. And I took his advice that night, and the final experience was more like a very passionate, a very very sweet and compassionate exorcism of myself in a very visual and visceral way. It's very difficult to talk about these experiences. I feel like I'm giving you pieces of a dream journal that you can maybe imagine but not necessarily understand. Like, yeah, I can give you that third night if you want, but tell me how all this sounds before I go on.
I think it's I think you're doing an excellent job by giving a description. It's very descriptive, and I can definitely imagine something with the first night. Second night is kind of...
I kept it mysterious for that one. It would be too much if I told you.
Enigmatic. So let's leave it at that. And then now the third one, you know, sort of, I wanted to say at the first one that you probably had, you know, more than enough, but that turned out to be true.
I thought of quitting after the second one because it was so visceral, right? If the first night could be summed up as consciousness goes on, period, full stop, right? This is your experience of what if consciousness goes on, right? Without attaching any absolutes to anything. The second night was consciousness goes on. There are levels of consciousness that are both completely intimately linked to one another and at the same time totally they have their own distinct identities and they can interact with one another and yourself, right? Like gods and goddesses and spirits and so forth. Like you can interact with these and feel intimately connected to them, but also offer them respect, right? It's like a fold up of consciousness, which is as best as I can explain it. Consciousness is into higher levels of consciousness. And then the final night was what I'd signed up for, which was the much more classic movie Arthurian dream quest type beat, which I was expecting, which was like, okay, I am actually much more aware and in control of where I am, how I feel, what I can interact with, and what my power is now, that in terms of how I can exert my sense of self within this state of consciousness. Now that I've gone through two gauntlets here of and levels of consciousnesses, I can sit here and I can be respectful and know my place within this dream state and come back with something very visceral and tangible and feels like it makes even more sense outside of the symbolic level. And so that night I took a couple of sips of the brew and just sat and waited. And unlike the first two nights where there was a lot of there was a lot of purging, right? Of just like of very specific kinds of like purging, vomiting, purging, which feels great, by the way, when you get there. It's not really as an aside, when it comes down to that experience, when you do finally get to a visceral, like physical vomiting or whatever, you feel so much better. You feel like it's the thing coming up that is the agony, not the actual experience. But when it came to the style of purging for this final night, having taken significantly less, it was more spitting, and not spitting, a little bit more just like ecstatic shaking. It felt good. It didn't feel like a lot was coming. It felt like whatever needed to be dredged up had already been dredged up, and then I was finally ready for the experience. And the experience was superhuman in this way, where I was closing my eyes. I'd been meditating throughout that whole week of experience. I was closing my eyes, going to meditation, following my breath. When things would come up, I would spit into my bucket, and I would be going in this very strange way upwards, right, spiritually, and then back down into my body and into the depths of myself, and then going back upwards for breath to this strange up place, and down again. And as I did that, I experienced a very profound sense that it's very difficult for me to shake, that I could see the entirety of the room that I was in without opening my eyes, and it was in this very, very blue light. Like I could see the entirety of that section of the hacienda with all of the people in it, and I saw them all doing everything that they were doing, but my eyes were not open. And I saw the shaman that was leading the ceremony, and he looked at me and he smiled at me and then continued at the ceremony. I was like, okay, that's a little funky. Like maybe this is this real or not? But I just went with it and started eventually bringing my attention up to the ceiling, and suddenly the ceiling became translucent until it was no longer there. And in the ceiling, I caught sight of this very specific God form. Um, what bears saying is that every night that we did this ritual, we would do a devotion to a different deity. Our shaman was an Englishman who happened to be versed in Hermetic magic, and Hermetic magic mixed in with a little bit of Indian of like Hindu ritual as well, right? So we did devotionals to three Hindu deities, and that night we were doing it. We did a devotional to the god Shiva, and so I was looking up into that starry sky. We had all these offerings and fruits to the deity um, there on the table, and I saw it open up, and I saw this Shiva figure arrayed in the clothing and manner of the painting that I'd been obsessed with from college of the Keeper of the Threshold. And at the same time, in a very, very, very funnily, right, because the trip was no longer that serious, very funnily, is like had this affectation of a Los Angeles surfer. You know, like, bro, you know, like that, but it wasn't without speaking. And I saw this deity look down on me, and I brought that in as I went from there back into myself, and suddenly found myself in this space just below my navel, this internal space. I want you to imagine a temple a temple structure derelict, covered in a combination of coral, like throbbing, living coral, and my own, you know, insides, like a level out of Dante's Inferno or something, like very, very visceral hell realm built on top of something old. And in the center of this strange derelict temple, there was this creature made of shadow and and thick black hair, and it was shaped like a dragon without wings, and it was a bit like a dragon mixed with a dog, mixed with a it's a gorilla, and it had this face of a dog skull with burning eyes, right? And it looked terrifying, but it also looked like it was in pain, right? And it screamed at me, right? It roared at me, but it screamed at me as a partially in anger and in anguish. And I'd been following these feelings of that all the way down into my core. And I saw this creature, and I knew I had two choices with the awareness that I had in this state of mind, which was I could kill it, right? I could do the whole, you know, like knight fights the dragon scene, in this space, and that would have a result, or I could do something else. And so within myself, I walked up to this creature and put my hand on its head. I kind of inched closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, and all of the different characters from the various experiences of that week, the deities, everything, the spirits, what have you, were right behind me as I inched closer and closer and closer to this being, to this animal, this like poor trapped animal. And I put my hand on its skull, and it started calming down as I got closer and closer. So easy, easy, easy. And I touched this thing's head, and the eyes went from being, these glowing hot coals leaking, like all this phantasmagoric smoke, to just like very much they were dim, and it relaxed a bit. And I found myself, this like just petting it, and eventually it's like, well, it's not this, whatever this thing is, it's not supposed to be here, right? Mm-hmm. And so I asked my guides behind me to help me to take it back to its home or whatever. And of course, just dream logic, right? I'm back in the hacienda now, but with my shadow, this great creature. And I see the deity in the ceiling, this like celestial ceiling, and it opened up like a zipper. It opened up a hole in the fabric of that reality, and I leapt onto this thing's back, and out of its shadow erupted these two massive wings, and I rode this skeletal shadowy dragon through that aperture to a complete other place. And whether I invented it, this new place, or not, it doesn't. It became very. It was as real as flying over a new country and looking down at a city. It was a perfect bird's eye view of this landscape that was incredibly chromatic, the color of spilled oil on a rainy day, right, on top of gravel. And the sky was just pitch black, no stars, just pitch black. And as we flew, me and this shadow creature, we looked down, and there was both detritus from different eras and times and places, both from my own memory and from fictional places, real places. And on top of it, there were packs of these shadowy, like draconic, dog-like, gorilla-like dragon beings, right? And it was very cute where we finally found a patch of ground that felt right. We settled in, and I said my goodbyes as it went off to be with whatever, with its little pack. And I just started walking through this landscape, and like a dream, it was my own awareness going, wow, I'm walking very fast through a lot. I'm walking the same rate I would walk normally, but the landscape itself is moving under me very quickly to get me to where I want to go. And as I walked, in the distance, I saw a crossroads with some railway tracking, and a somewhat of a silhouette in the center of the crossroads. And I went there, and I spoke to this being. I had an entire other experience on top of that. But to keep the story quite short, the crossroads was my way. The center of the crossroads, this square, was my way back to full awareness of my body and coming back. And as I came back, I looked, and the shaman was looking right at me with this big smile on his face. Just like there was just this very, very, very strange moment where I could feel like he had some idea, not of my experience necessarily, but of whatever level of awareness or whatever level of experience I had. And it was beautiful. That's as much a detail as I can get in a ramble, rather than in writing.
That's a lot of detail, and I'm really glad that you shared that. I haven't ever done ayahuasca. I have done mushrooms, but not at that level where you have an ego death, because what you're depicting is very intense, and very sort of very, you have the whole ritual around it. I did it like on what you call it, on my own basically, or with one or two friends. So but it kind of reminds me of the series. I'm not sure if you've seen on Netflix, but one is How to Change Your Mind, which is also based on a book.
Yeah, I actually have the book.
Yeah.
Hilariously enough.
Definitely check out the series too, because there's like a final, the fourth episode in the series, where he sort of expands on the book, where he goes into the what the Native Americans use in America, of course, to enhance their experiences. It's something with a P. I can't get on the name, but anyway, it's a really beautiful one.
Right? Depending on where it is, I think it might be peyote.
Yeah, peyote.
Right?
Yeah, peyote. Yeah, that's the name. So it's all about peyote and the Native Americans, and how they got suppressed, but also how their resilience and how they cope, and also the experience of the healing itself, because that's basically what the book is about. So really very thoughtful. And other thing that sort of came to my mind while listening to you was surviving death. These NDEs, like near-death experiences, and people that can sort of look at the operation table while being operated upon, while having no consciousness, or at least no sight of the operation itself. And but a lot of other things. This is also a very beautiful series, and if you watch it till the end, because the last episode is awesome.
Honestly, I think I might go catch it. We're like, I think we're very, very close. I think now, finally, we're much closer to our. I think as a mass, it's a shame that it's taken like hundreds and hundreds of years, but like we're reaching a point where I think we're like, it's much more socially acceptable to have these like liminal spiritual experiences, and it's something that I think was being cried out for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know why now you can get mushroom chocolates you can just buy them. They come in like cheeky packages, and then you can have a spiritual experience. But every culture has their coming of age ceremony, and some of them have the same juice, but some of them do not. Like in Judaism we have the bar mitzvah, right, which is when you become a man. But for Judaism, what does that mean? It means that you can read. It means like you've been taught how to read. You can read. All right, cool. Now you can participate in society. And there are other things, right? Like there's for women in Judaism, there's the mikvah, right? There's the ritual bath, which is again a little bit closer, but you still have a lot of societal dynamics that don't make it fully into the type of spiritual experience that you might experience on substances and stuff, right? But it's like, you ever try meditating in water, it's a whole thing, right? Changing temperature's a whole thing, right? That's why we're obsessed with ice baths right now. But like we're creeping towards, I think, a healthier society, because imagine what happens if you can experience this technically this gauntlet, right? Maybe I'm just too immature to call it anything else, but this gauntlet of spiritual maturation. What would happen if you did that to every young adult had some variety of that, not necessarily with ayahuasca, but like even with mushrooms or marijuana, where you turn whatever age and you go, okay, well, now it's time for you to experience your place within this society in a way that you can discover on your own, within yourself, right? Rather than us trying to control and tell you what to do, you can figure out where you sit with regards to your family dynamic, your societal dynamic, like where you feel you belong, and you can get that. No one tells you what to do, but you will have that experience by tasting a little bit of like mortality and but beyond that, super consciousness, right? It's like your sense of connection, and we're getting there. I'm shocked that we're getting there. I did mushrooms with my father, for God's sake. It's my mother just recently had a mushroom experience. I would have never have thought that. You know, these like 1950s society, South American, usually very strict people. My mother especially. You know, like getting that phone call and being like, I had this experience. We need to talk about. I want to talk to you. I was this, that, and the other things are things that I'm sorry for. I was not expecting to get that level of conversation in my lifetime, and I managed to get it before. You know, now that I'm in my early 30s, it's shocking to me.
Yeah, it gets people grounded, right, and it gets them in touch with a deeper sense of self, and also with their surroundings, like you say. So, what do you think is the cause that we're getting there? Is there? Do you see there's a reason behind it, or?
We are at a point. I think it's because we're at a point within our understanding. We're still very fucking stupid, but we're like as a species, right? As a like this is here we go. This is me getting up on the soapbox. We have enough money and enough material and enough resources to feed the world over and over and over and over and over again, and to be able to have everybody have, you know, like to be able to live well, you know, and in comfort. And the only thing that really we've been able to have that, I will remember eventually where I read this, but statistically speaking, we've been able to do that since the 1970s, right?
Yeah.
We just don't, because human greed is a hell of a drug. It's an incredible drug. And don't get me wrong, that's not me saying money bad. Money is amazing and beautiful, and financial freedom is to be strived for, and you know, it's an incredible tool. But the human greed, and immature mind of the mass consciousness is what makes it sometimes, is what brings us to this place. And I think that there are many people that you know, have a lot of compassion for other people, and that are, you know, we have many people that make the human experience a very beautiful experience. But I do think that having a very visceral shamanic experience, young, and I don't know whether that's at, you know, if that's your bar mitzvah age at like 13 or like at 25, you could do a lot worse than having that than not, and creating this sense of, wow, okay, wait a second, like I am conscious, right? There's a possibility that my consciousness stretches out into forever, right? Like I am connected intimately to everyone around me. I'm connected to things I didn't think I was connected to. I can dive into this and then come back to earth and feel something is worth exploring at least the once. And I don't know, we the fact that we're getting there now, you know, and not just like sneaking around with mushrooms as teenagers, and getting to a point where it's like, yeah, you should go to mushroom therapy, right?
Yeah.
Have a shamanic experience instead of just talking about it. We're at a healthier place than we were, even what even 5 years ago. Like we're getting to a much better place.
I absolutely agree. I often say, like, the moment, because we're sort of like at a crossroads. That's, at least that's how I feel about it. And I think we're on the cusp of, you know, a revolution. Actually, multiple revolutions. I think revolutions all over the place that are sort of interconnecting, and Bitcoin and crypto, Web3. That's all just one slight part of it. But I think we are actually on the cusp of also a spiritual, perhaps even a religious revolution, especially a social and cultural revolution. And I feel like, because there's so much at stake, that you get these forces, these dynamics that are sort of pushing against each other. So I'm very curious which way it will go, and I hope that you are right, and that it will be in a good way, that we will actually sort of become fully human and
I
become
wonder,
fully integrated.
maybe it's more like we will deal with human greed in a different way than we dealt with it before, right? It's like there is more awareness now of the drivers behind that greed, and also more opportunity for self-exploration allows for less stupidity. I'm not gonna make a blanket statement and have some mess, there's no messianic. I'm very happy that I grew up Jewish, because we don't really, like, we do have our very conservative and orthodox sides and sects that are like, we're waiting for the man, like we're waiting for the one king that will come and unite us all, and then finally we can play World of Warcraft like we all intended. But like, it's more like we're maturing bit by bit, right? It's like every day gets a little bit better. I don't have any expectations, but I know it for a fact. It's like today was better than yesterday. Who we were now is, you would infinitely prefer to who you were last year and who you were 5 years ago, and so on and so forth. And I don't know, I feel pretty damn good about it.
Well, I think we should end on that specific positive note. I really wanted to talk about so much more, but I'm sort of running out of time, and I think we should do another discussion and then talk about all the other stuff that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. If I did ramble today, I
Oh,
apologize.
no. I loved every minute of it. So I think it was like a really awesome, very special show. And I'm very thankful that you shared those experiences. And
It was a very awesome, very special conversation. I feel like I can go into the studio today with all this in mind, and honestly, I might just go back into my folder of images from Peru, because I haven't looked at those images. I haven't read my own. It would be masturbatory to read my own thread, right? But I haven't read that thread in God knows, at least a year. So it was good to see those images from a fresh perspective, in terms of like, do you know when you think you know something, right? And you think it's very intimate to you, because you can't judge your own consciousness experience too much, right? But there's like, you learn how much you think you know and how much you actually know in reviewing the material that you've gathered. And I feel like that's something really cool about this process of like holding on to all these images and stuff. We didn't even get to talk about AI.
No. I also wanted to, but I think this was perfect, and I think I think it's like a capsule, and I think it's perfect as it is, and I think we should just do another show and just talk about AI and all the other stuff.
Anytime. It was a pleasure, man. Seriously.
Yeah, and for all the people who haven't yet checked it, check the thread, the Twitter thread. I'll also link it underneath the YouTube video. So and tell us what you think about these images and these paintings, and what André talked about.
Oh, and also, before I forget, because I wouldn't be very good at marketing at all, and I'm not saying I am in any capacity, clearly, but if you do have a chance, I have an edition of 10 of a very beautiful 9x12 oil painting called the Minotaur, which, if once it reaches it's 6, I believe, as of this time, unless I go back and check it and receive a happy surprise, 6 of the 10 editions have been sold. Once we hit 10, I'm going to give away and raffle and random draw. One of the 10 people that have bought an edition will receive the physical painting in the mail. So help me reach 10, because these other collectors are already they're already like, they're getting antsy. They're like, I would love to have that painting. I'd love that. I can feel I can smell the saliva. So it's like, it's great. Pick one up if you want. They're fucking fabulous. It's a fabulous piece. Very, very beautiful. And yeah, this past year has just been a very different body of work, a very golden body of work. I think that I'm probably going to be known for, honestly. The more I look at it, it's just it's a much more matured version of what I do.
It's it's phenomenal, and that's also why I wanted to have you on the show. Like I said, you're an artist. I think you're very well respected within the space, and rightly so. And people who don't know you yet, definitely check out your work and start collecting them, because they might, like you say, become very important later on. And they're already gorgeous anyway. So why not?
You honor me, brother. You do. I mean, it's not like I don't have my share of ego, but like I really do feel incredibly passionately about these works. They're really beautiful, and thank you for having me on. Seriously, it was a pleasure.
My pleasure. And let's do it again.
Sounds good, man. Sounds great.
Okay. Take care, everybody, and I wish you a really good day, afternoon, night, wherever you are, and see you soon.